Welcome. Good evening. My name is Henry Bogdan. I'm with Maryland Nonprofits. It's my pleasure to welcome you tonight to this forum for the Democratic primary candidates for the office of Maryland Comptroller. Our sponsors are the League of Women Voters of Maryland, the Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore, Maryland Nonprofits, Maryland Reporter, Maryland Matters, and Maryland Latinos Unidos. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government and works to increase understanding of major public policy issues and influences public policy through education and advocacy. The League's mission is to empower voters and protect democracy. The Schaefer Center for Public Policy at the University of Baltimore College of Public Affairs is a nonpartisan applied research and public service organization It leverages the expertise of the university community in its work to inform decision makers through applied research, develop public servants through its training programs, promote public discourse through policy analysis and conferences, and grow future leaders through its Maryland Public Service Academy. Maryland Nonprofits is a statewide association of more than 1,400 nonprofit organizations and institutions with members in every county of Maryland. Its mission is to strengthen organizations and networks for greater quality of life and equity. Maryland Nonprofits is also the home of the Standards for Excellence Institute. This year, they are celebrating their 30th anniversary. MarylandReporter.com is the original nonprofit news website covering state government and politics in Maryland. Founded in 2009 as a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, MarylandReporter.com does original coverage and produces a daily roundup of coverage of government and politics from news sites and bloggers across the state. Foundations help start Maryland Reporter, and it is supported by private donors, foundations, and sponsors. Maryland Matters is a nonprofit news website focusing on state government and politics, launched in 2017 as a blog. Maryland Matters began publishing a daily news report in 2018. It has more reporters covering the State House and the Baltimore Sun and the Washington Post combined. Maryland Matters is funded by reader donations and foundation grants. Maryland Latinos Unidos is a statewide network that collaborates and builds collective power for the benefit of Maryland's Latino and immigrant communities. MLU members are organizations, businesses, and individuals who support Latino and immigrant communities across Maryland. MLU addresses the challenges faced by emerging communities, provides technical assistance for community-serving organizations, builds links to all levels of government, and advances the knowledge of the Latino community through research and outreach. This evening's forum is being recorded. This recording and recordings from last week's forums for the Democratic and Republican candidates for Maryland Attorney General are now available on the University of Baltimore website. That link will be in the chat, and the websites of the host organizations. This evening's recording will be available in a few days. We will not be hosting a forum for the candidates for the Republican nomination for Comptroller. There is only one candidate in that race, and the League of Women Voters rules prohibit hosting a single candidate events. On behalf of the sponsors, we encourage you to become informed on the candidates and involved with the issues. You can do this through the League of Women Voter of Maryland's Vote 411 voter guide and their website, which is link posted in the chat. The voter guide itself will be available on June 4th. Or the Maryland Matters voter guide, now available on their website, also posted in the chat. We encourage you to vote. The deadline to register to vote is the 28th of June. Early voting begins July 7 and runs through July 14. The primary election itself is on July 19th. The deadline to request a mail-in ballot is the 12th of July, and ballots must be postmarked or placed in a designated ballot box by 8 p.m. on July 19. If you request a mail-in ballot and you decide not to vote by mail-in and go to the polls, you can either take the mail-in ballot with you and cast it at the polling place, or you will be asked to vote by provisional ballot. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening is Josh Kurtz, the co-founder and editor of Maryland Matters. Josh?
Thanks so much, Henry. Good evening, everybody. Good evening to our candidates and good evening to the audience. Thank you again to all the sponsors and thanks to everyone for being here. With only two candidates, it's going to be pretty simple, I think, I hope, famous last words. And here's how we're going to work it. The candidates are each going to make 2-minute opening statements. We picked names out of a hat a few minutes ago, and Mayor Adams will get to go first when it comes to opening statements. Then we'll just go back and forth as far as who goes first during the question and answer period. The sponsors, with some help from members of the public, have come up with a bunch of questions for tonight. After the 2-minute opening statements, the candidates will get 2 minutes each to answer the questions. They will be able to request a 30-second rebuttal if they so choose. And then at the end, we'll have, of the program, we'll have 3-minute closing statements. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take questions from the audience in the chat tonight, but I think we have a pretty good cross-section of questions. The questions are really, cover a few different things. The role of the Comptroller's office, the Comptroller's office and kind of its role more broadly in state government. There'll be some questions about the Board of Public Works because, as most of our audience knows, the Comptroller is a key member of that important body. And then we'll have some issue questions as well. So our candidates are State Delegate Brooke Learman, who will tell you about herself in a minute. But first we will ask Mayor Tim Adams, Bowie Mayor Tim Adams, to introduce himself. I should say, I'm not sure where it's going to be in your screen, but there is an electric clock that's going to count down their 2 minutes, and we'll be steadfast in enforcing that. So anyway, we start with Mr. Adams and then Delegate Learman. So Mr. Mayor.
Hey, good evening, and thank you to all the sponsors of this evening's forum. I think it is so important that we continue to push our democracy and the importance of voting and making sure that we have knowledgeable voters of what's going on. A little bit about myself. I come from very humble beginnings. We were financially insecure as I was coming up. Basically, I grew up poor. But my family taught me the value of really hard work, opportunity, and education. You know, I was fortunate enough to graduate from a public high school, went on to college. I went to Xavier University in New Orleans, HBCU, and I went on to get my MBA. From there, I eventually started a business out of the trunk of my car. And from there, it has now grown to one of the largest Black-owned businesses in the entire nation. And I'm very proud of that because every day, hundreds and hundreds of men and women get up and put on their SATAC badge and go out and do national security and national defense. From there, I'm now the first African-American ever to be mayor of the city of Bowie. And I've guided the city through this COVID, this pandemic, and through all the challenges we had there without raising any taxes. And spearheading initiatives that really work towards government being more equitable and fair. You know, Maryland has never had a comptroller like me. I would bring over 30 years of executive leadership and experience as a CEO and a mayor to the job. I would bring the fight that I've fought my whole life of trying to make life more equitable, fair to everyone.
Thank you. Just in on the wire, Mayor Adams. Appreciate that. And now everybody sees kind of how that timer is going to work. Now I'm pleased to present to you Delegate Brooke Learman.
Thank you so much, Josh. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and all of the organizations for putting this together. And thank you to the 162 of you who are taking time on a weeknight to learn about the Comptroller's race. I appreciate it. I'm Brooke Learman. I'm a civil rights and disability rights attorney. I'm a public school mom, and I'm a leader in the House of Delegates, where I've served for 2 terms representing part of Baltimore City. And I am thrilled to be running to serve you as your next state comptroller. You know, for the first time since 1998, we have an open seat for state comptroller. And that really means that the 2022 election is our chance to decide that in Maryland, we can be bold and we can do better. And that's really what I've spent my life doing. In college, saw huge disparities that existed between my campus and the rural poverty around it. So I jumped in and helped to start a mentoring program, working with children in public housing, and then helped turn it into a nonprofit that over 20 years later is going strong. As an attorney, I've been working and representing unpaid low-wage workers, with people with disabilities, wrongfully convicted people, and winning cases around the country. And for the past 8 years as a state delegate, I've helped oversee our $52 billion state budget. I've led on school funding, on the environment, on supporting small businesses and labor this past session as well, and on reproductive health care. I've led our fiscal committees, including as chair of the Joint Pension Committee as well. So what does that mean? It means that I know and understand that our state comptroller is uniquely situated to focus on the economic challenges and the income-based issues in our state. And I'm truly excited to bring a bold new vision to that office and the ability to get things done. Whether we're talking about solving and tackling the racial wealth divide in the state, overcoming the challenge of climate change, investing in our public schools, or more. So thank you for tuning in. I know the comptroller is key to building an equitable state, and I'm excited for the discussion.
Thank you, Delegate Lehrman. And that actually kind of segues nicely into the first question. I think probably most of the audience has a vague idea what the comptroller's office does, but I'd like to hear kind of your interpretation of the key functions of the office.
Am I starting off this time?
Yes,
Are we going?
yes,
Okay.
yes, Delegate Lehrman.
Great.
Yeah,
So the comptroller. So I like to think of the comptroller as having, it's a huge office, over 1,082 potential employees, PINs as we call them in state government. But a really key focus, of course, is on the economic challenges of our state. So 3 things I like folks to keep in mind. 1, the comptroller is one of only 3 independently elected statewide officials. And so we need that comptroller to be a statewide voice and advocate on the major economic challenges facing our families and small businesses. 2, the comptroller is a member of really important state boards, right? Including the State Retirement and Pension Board and the Board of Public Works. And I know we're going to get into both of those more, but I think if you look at it, you'll see that the comptroller really is one of the people who holds the power of the purse in the state of Maryland. And so it's so essential, especially as all the infrastructure dollars are coming from the federal government, that our comptroller be the people's advocate, be an independent voice, ensuring that we're using our dollars to get best value, right? That we are ensuring that we're not waiving our minority business enterprise requirements, that we're investing in Maryland-based businesses, and that we're thinking about how to use our dollars to build a more sustainable state and to prepare for climate change. And then, of course, I always feel bad reminding people that we are running for comptroller, and yes, I am running to be your next tax collector. But even there, right, it's so essential that we modernize our tax administration system, that we focus on using the resources of the office to ensure that people know what they owe, make it easy to pay. And for those who can afford to and don't pay, ensure we enforce the law, right? Everybody needs to pay their fair share. But likewise, the burden shouldn't be on our lowest income residents to claim credits like the earned income tax credit. The comptroller needs to be working with those folks to set up a taxpayer advocate office. So the bottom line is that the comptroller is the first office in our government to see the numbers that tell the story of how Maryland families and businesses and communities are doing. That's the comptroller's office.
Thank you. Mayor Adams, I'd love to hear sort of your interpretation of the key functions of the office.
Let me take it off mute.
Oh, you just muted yourself. Now you're good.
Okay, there we go. Hey, well, I think it's important that we understand what we just heard. The comptroller is the chief fiscal officer of the state of Maryland. And what that means is his responsibility, or her responsibility, is to make sure that we're watching the dollars, that we're making sure that there's accountability, justice, and change. And what I mean by that is, remember, the comptroller being the chief fiscal officer is something that someone needs to have that executive experience. I bring 30 years of executive experience from both the private and the public sector. That experience is so important because remember, the comptroller isn't just the tax collector, but also collects all revenue from the state. Remember, the comptroller is the chief paymaster. It's someone like I have to do with large organizations to make sure that we pay all vendors and that we pay all of our state employees. The comptroller is someone who has to be able to manage budgets and create budget and do those things. Those are things I do as a mayor every day in working with the citizens and working through those budgets and those financial issues. Understand the comptroller has to be able to have an understanding of what it is to create those board of estimates and work with that so that the governor and the legislature can decide how much money we really have to spend to make sure we have a solid budget. Has to do with our understanding how much money is it that we can really borrow. And we can do that. So it really is an executive level position, one that you need to be able to have the experience as I do, as I said, after 30 years. And you have to be able to fight for people. I've been fighting to level the playing field and understand that and have that experience to make sure that all Marylanders can participate.
Thank you. Delegate Lerman, do you want a 30-second for any additional remarks and reflections? Okay. So the next question will go to Mayor Adams, and first, and then Delegate Lerman. Let's talk a little bit about the role of the Comptroller's office in kind of charting the economic success of the state. You know, how would you anticipate the Comptroller's office aiding the general economy of Maryland? What specific items do you think could help make the economy work for everybody? Mayor Adams?
Yeah, I think it's important that we all understand and realize that we're going through an inflationary time right now. I think we need to understand that there's a potential of a recession. And that's where I talk about that executive leadership and executive experience. You see, I currently not only am running a company, but I also am the mayor of one of the larger cities in the state of Maryland. And so we have those challenges that come. The kind of things we need to do is, number one, make sure that everybody pays their fair share in taxes. You know, what we have right now is where we have some corporations who simply aren't paying their fair share. And we need to make sure that we go after them and make sure we close all these tax loopholes. You know, we've got to stop all the sole source contracts. We've got to stop all of these single bid contracts. We've got to make sure that we stop all these waivers. And that's something that I've been doing, and I've fought that fight and understand, because with the Board of Public Works, you have to understand contracts, and I've been fighting that for years. Equity and inclusion is not just a term, it's something we have to apply. I've been fighting that and successful with that across this country, having built other businesses and helping to make sure that everybody gets a fair shot. You know, one of the things we look at when we talk about equity and inclusion is we need to make sure that we level the playing field, that we make sure we talk about our MBE goals, we need to reach them. But we need to have somebody who has the executive experience, who understands how to manage a large organization, who can manage that bureaucracy, who can bring those innovative touches there to enhance what we do. I mean, I do cybersecurity for our nation, but bringing those data analytics and other things to catch the cheats, the people who aren't paying their fair share.
Thanks, Delegate Lerman.
Thank you. So the question was about how the Comptroller can face
aid the general economy and,
right.
and yeah.
Sure. So a few things. It's a great question. Say, number one is our AAA bond rating, right? We have to make sure that we retain our AAA bond rating. We're one of very few states that has a AAA bond rating. And with that AAA bond rating, we can borrow money at lower rates. And that AAA bond rating, of course, comes from the rating agencies who appreciate the fact that we have a strong and diverse economy in Maryland. It's not completely based on one sector, that we have a strong and balanced tax system, you know, among property, income, sales taxes, they're variable, and that we have the Board of Public Works, right, which is a unique body in America. So one is that we have to make sure we maintain that AAA bond rating. Two is that we have to make sure that we're using our capital dollars, especially, you know, we have a surplus now and we had a surplus and we are continuing to do well, and all the federal dollars that are coming in. We have to make sure that we're using those to grow our economy and support Maryland-based businesses, because our capital budget is our strongest job creation tool that we have as a government. I've worked on the appropriations committee, so I've worked very closely on our capital budget over the years. I understand it intimately as I've been lobbying and working on, you know, working in the trenches on different projects and seeing how they bear fruit in their communities. So we have to make sure that those dollars are staying in Maryland, that they're going to our Black-owned and immigrant-owned, our women-owned, our veteran-owned businesses, that we're not doing huge out-of-state contracts that then end up over budget and overpriced and not generating income and building wealth in Maryland. And then finally, I think we need to make sure that we're being good fiduciaries of our pension fund and ensuring that, when we're thinking about investments, that we even start thinking about how we can invest some of that money in local businesses, which over 30 states around the country do, to provide additional capital to their state's businesses. So I'm excited about all that the Comptroller's office can do to be an advocate and a partner to our small businesses in the state.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, do you want a 30-second to add anything?
Yeah, I would just like to say that opportunity is the real key to growing our economy. Making sure that everyone has a level playing field and a chance to really participate in all that's going on economically within the state. See, one of the things as mayor is I put in place many things that have helped our economy grow and will continue to do that. I've made sure that we have equity and inclusion within all of the city and within our budgets. So it's something that I have that executive experience in doing.
Thanks. Delegate Lerman, anything to add?
No, I mean, I think it's just really essential that when we think about how the Board of Public Works awards dollars, that we think about ensuring that we're modernizing the system so that there's more transparency, that we're not waiving MBE requirements, and that we are making the procurement process easier for small businesses and new businesses to negotiate, to find that opportunity and to grow prosperity around the state.
Thank you. You've both anticipated a few of my questions, and let's kind of stay with the flow here and talk about, and Delegate Lerman, you'll be up first here. Let's talk about the state's MBE goals. How are we doing meeting meeting our goals? What can be done to strengthen them? What can be done to make sure we're actually succeeding? And if we're falling short, why are we falling short? So Delegate Lerman, you'll be up first for that.
Great. It's a great question. And we are falling short. I mean, I don't think it's any secret that there are regular waivers are applied for and granted at the Board of Public Works. And it's a shame and it's unacceptable, frankly, because what we need to do is work not just at the Board of Public Works level, but dig in to our procurement regulations and work through with our agencies to make sure that we're reforming and streamlining the bidding process, right? So we can ensure that there are small businesses that can, and Black-owned and women-owned and veteran-owned businesses, MBEs that can apply. We have to look at creating a small business mobilization fund so that we can provide access to capital for vendors who've secured contracts and are preparing for engagement with the state. Basically, we have to remove a lot of the barriers that exist, and so that we can open up that opportunity for these MBEs to participate and to be awarded dollars. And it's essential that we do this because right now we are not always getting the best value for our dollars. When we are not awarding contracts in state, when we're not opening up the process and providing opportunity to MBEs, it means that we're going with the same vendors all the time. And they are probably not offering us the variety that we need, right? And so it's really essential that we encourage state spending with our MBEs, that we improve payment transparency, that we reform and streamline the bidding process, and that we really ensure equitable contracting so that all these businesses have a fair shot at state contracts and, oversee the processes and structures to encourage contracting with local vendors and MBEs. One of the things we need to do as well is modernize our contracting terms and conditions and improve procurement forecasting so we can look out at what we're going to need and then work with those MBEs at the beginning to get them into the process. So there's a lot we can do. I'm really excited about working on it. I've been beginning to work on it as a legislator and look forward to the future.
Thank you. Mayor Adams, on MBE goals and making them stronger and making sure they work.
I've been fighting that fight for over 3 decades. I've done it not only in the community and helping build other businesses, but legal battles. I've testified on the Hill and with the Small Business Subcommittee for the Senate on trying to improve that. One of the things we need to understand is we're not doing very well on our MBE goals. We hit like 14% out of a potential 29%. And of that, only 0.4% went to Black-owned businesses. We have to do business differently. And we have to have someone who's experienced in fighting that and challenging that. Look, we have prime contractors who are very sly at trying to get around the minority procurement laws and regulations. And we've got to have someone like myself who's experienced that and who has fought that and won. I mean, you got to understand, we have to also hold our agencies accountable. We have way too many agencies that are waiving procurements where they're doing retroactive contracts. But we also have to make sure that the contracts are written in such a way that they don't have the RFP designed so that it's targeted to any one business and it excludes others. We've got to stop bundling the contracts. We've got to make sure that they're small enough that we can break them up so other minority businesses can participate. You know, we've got to really work at making sure that we stop all these sole source contracts, as well as these single bid contracts. Some sole source are needed, but single bid contracts is when they simply say, oh, we couldn't find anybody. We couldn't find anybody else. And when it comes to the minority waivers, it's just unacceptable for people to say they can't find us. We're here and we're ready to do work.
Thank you. Let's stay kind of roughly on this topic, and Mayor Adams, I'll ask you to go first. Are there any particular procurement contracts that, you know, the state has signed on to that, you know, you think should be monitored more closely at the moment?
And if that's coming to me first, I think there are a lot of contracts we need to look at. Okay. There are certain things that we need to really take a moment and pause on. You know, one of the things that's been coming up a lot are the P3s. We look at the P3s and we look at how those contracts are being written and all of those things, but we don't make sure that the minority position is established prior to awarding those contracts. I will not approve anything that comes across the desk in the Board of Public Works. I will not vote for if it does not have that MB inclusion, if it isn't trying to address the goals of making sure that our minority businesses and women-owned businesses and our MBEs have a fair chance. And that also goes with what we see what's happening with unions. We need to make sure that those things are negotiated up front as well, because we can't leave them out. See, we need to make sure that we're aggressively trying to make sure that we are participating, that all of those contracts that are awarded and all of those things that are done really reflects the state of Maryland and what we look like. It's the same thing when you talk briefly about the Board of Pension, the pension system. We need to make sure that we do that double bottom line investment where we're investing and we're trying to get a good return, but also investing in businesses that are here in the state, but also investing in those that aren't so involved in hurting our environment as well. But that MBE goal is about making sure that people get the opportunity. I've been fighting that. Stop the waivers, stop the sole source, stop the single bid, and making sure that we talk to the community. I understand it. I'll be the chief equity and inclusion officer for the Comptroller.
Delegate Lehrman, procurement contracts that you think should be monitored more closely?
Sure. There were a host of contracts that were approved by the Board of Public Works after the fact during the pandemic, and those were incredibly problematic. I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars of contracts that Governor Hogan approved from COVID test kits to unemployment benefits to our health department that essentially were a huge waste of money. I mean, they didn't do what they were supposed to do. I mean, as a legislator, I will tell you, I fielded hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of calls for people who could not get access to their unemployment during the pandemic because of the terrible system that the state put into place with a third party that it used as a vendor. These are totally unacceptable contracts. I also have huge concerns about the P3 agreement that was signed off on by Transurban and by the Board of Public Works. It doesn't have environmental, it needs more environmental work. There's not enough labor, there's not security for labor, for PLA. And we've never done an analysis on whether it would be more cost effective to do the plan that MDOT wants to do using a traditional procurement versus a P3. Especially with the federal dollars coming in, that's probably what we absolutely need to do that analysis. And the Hogan administration has never done it. So I think there are a number of contracts over the years that the Board of Public Works has approved that need more scrutiny. And I'm excited to bring that, but also to create systems that allow the public to understand the contracts that we're signing off on. Every Board of Public Works meeting, I put up a little graphic on my social media called the BPW brief that just does a little synopsis of a couple things that were signed off on to give people an understanding. But we need a more robust online tool so that people can log in and see where their money is going and understand the contracts as they're living out.
Thank you. I was going to ask this at some point, and I think we may have come to the right point, but I know there are members of the audience who would kill me if I did not ask you about the P3 and the Capital Beltway and Interstate 270 widening. And this question will go to you first, Delegate Learman.
Sure.
So, I mean, you've expressed some reservations about how things have been done so far, but in your mind, is this sort of a done deal now?
No.
Will there be an opportunity to revisit it? And Governor Hogan, I think, envisions going farther north, going farther east on the Beltway with this plan. What's your view of that kind of generally? And then Mayor Adams, I'll ask you the same.
Sure. I'll just start by saying there is real congestion around the Beltway. There are real challenges that we're facing, and we have to get a handle on the traffic challenges that we have as a state in a number of ways, both short-term and long-term, right? By ensuring that people can afford to live near where they work, ensure that there is transit availability so that people can choose to not use a car. For instance, to get from Frederick down the 270 corridor to DC, the Brunswick line is incredibly limited right now. To call it transit is a little bit of a stretch. It's so limited. And Hogan, the administration has not been partnering with local governments over the past umpteen years as it's tried to do this. So I think there are real challenges that have to be addressed. That said, I think the process that's been engaged in has been incredibly problematic, to put it mildly, in terms of not working with the General Assembly, not working with local government and local stakeholders to make sure that we could come to some consensus. There are huge challenges with the environmental aspects of it. I have huge concerns that it won't actually solve congestion, right? It's like in Field of Dreams, what you need to know about traffic is what you need to know about baseball. If you build it, they will come. There's also huge questions about labor and how we're using our money. And so while I think that Transurban expects that there will need to be a reopening of the contract and a renegotiation to talk about what it will look like, I think most of the gubernatorial candidates also agree with that. So we have to solve the congestion, but I do not think that the solution that was put on the table is in fact a solution. So I look forward, I've been working on this issue for many years, first as a member of the Appropriations Committee, and then as a leader on the Environment and Transportation Committee, passing legislation through the House that has not passed the Senate, sadly, and working with my colleagues in Montgomery County and Prince George's County on that, and look forward to continuing.
Thanks. Mayor Adams, what's your view of the P3 process with Transurban so far? Do you think it's a done deal? And what do you make of the notion of continuing the project up 270 and east along 495 into Prince George's County?
Well, I have to say, I have not been a big proponent for this. I think it has been extremely problematic how they set it up. When you start looking at what the intent was, I mean, I don't believe that the widening and those things will actually relieve congestion. We talk about putting in toll lanes and those kind of things, when in fact, that's not going to help the average person. I mean, those who can afford maybe $50 one way and all, that's fine for them. But for the average worker and for the average person who has to deal with that, that doesn't do anything for them. I don't think that we did a good job of making sure that we looked at all the environmental impacts that happening there in a lot of jurisdictions. And we need to make sure that happens. I don't believe it's a done deal. I think anything you're doing, particularly when you're talking about creating lanes and about winding and all that, we have to talk about light rail. We have to talk about alternatives to the driving that they have. That we have to give that light rail opportunity for people to do that. We have to make sure that we negotiate in such a way with those P3, that union and others, if they're going to work on that, that they truly work out those deals ahead of time. There's been some challenges there. And I think that goes back to how the Board of Public Works functions. And we have to change that so that those who lose a bid or whatever have a real fair opportunity to challenge that and make sure they happen. And then going back to the other thing about equity and inclusion, we have to make sure that our minority businesses are included upfront in all of those discussions and given a competitive opportunity to compete and share in the wealth of what we're doing.
Thank you. Just remind the candidates, if they do want an additional 30 seconds, feel free to jump in. I'm not going to ask after each question, but just the opportunity is there for you. So
sure, I'd like to add something that was maybe the previous question, but I didn't want to interrupt when you moved on to this. Really briefly, I have represented small blind-owned businesses all over the country in federal and state procurements. And I think I just want people to understand what happens sometimes. So I'll be representing a small blind-owned business. The huge corporation will come in. They'll say they can do it for this very cheap amount. And then we'll go file a FOIA and see that year after year, they've filed change order after change order. So it ends up being more expensive than the small local disadvantaged business would have been. And that's why we feel so strongly that best value means going with MBEs sometimes, often.
Got it. Thank you. We've talked a little bit about the Comptroller's office and the legislature. I have a few questions about, for lack of a better term, the relationship. And I guess I'm beginning with you, Mayor Adams. So despite the fact that the current Comptroller is a 16-year veteran of the legislature, he has not gotten along all that well with a lot of the legislature, certainly with legislative leaders. What do you think the consequences of that have been, and how do you fix that?
Well, I think one of the things that has to be done is we have to make sure that we put the taxpayers first. That is where the Comptroller really needs to focus. Focus on what matters most to the taxpayers, what is fairest to the taxpayers, and I think that's where that executive leadership I talk about, and having done that both in the private sector and in the public sector, understanding that you have to be able to work with all groups. As mayor, as you can imagine, it's one of those where you have to work with everyone. You have to make sure that you have the ability to work with everyone. We're in my city is a nonpartisan when you get elected. And it gives me an opportunity to work with everyone and truly work towards that. See, I don't believe the Comptroller's job is that of a legislator, but that of being the independent voice for the people. I know that there are many in the legislature who support me as well. There are many that understand and know that my ability to work with people is something I've shown all along. We talk about the MBE programs and some of those things. I've done those things all across the country and been very successful. I've been championing, tearing down those barriers and tearing down those walls. And that's so important. The Comptroller has to be that independent truth teller. That person who can tell everyone, be it the legislator or the government, but most importantly, tell the people what we believe is in their best interest. You know, the legislature already has their representative, that's the treasurer. The people need an independent person in Comptroller. And that's what I bring as an executive, an independent voice for the people.
Delegate Lehrman.
Thank you for that question. You know, I've been a leader in the House of Delegates now for 2 terms. And I believe that one of the things that you need to do as a statewide leader is listen to the people that you're representing, bring people together to identify challenges, and then find solutions to those challenges, local solutions often, but make sure that the weight of the Comptroller's office is put behind those solutions. And that means building consensus, building coalitions to address and tackle some of the problems that we have. That's what I've been doing for my time in the legislature and outside of the legislature in the community as a community advocate and more as a woman leader in Central Maryland and in the state. And I look forward to doing that as the next comptroller. You know, one instance I will say is during the pandemic, we saw the huge digital divide that exists in the state. And so I worked to create a huge coalition of over 60 organizations around the state, urban, rural, educators, businesses, unions, contractors, and together, you know, agriculture, rural Maryland folks, we all work together to write and create the Digital Connectivity Act of 2021 that created the Office of Statewide Broadband, and we seeded it with $400 million. We set requirements to create a map, to identify, to define what high-speed affordable internet meant for people, and to make sure that we could close the digital divide in the state of Maryland. The only way we're going to tackle big challenges like that is by working together. And I was really proud that every single bill I passed in 2021 was passed with bipartisan support, including that bill, which the governor then signed as an emergency measure the day after session. And this past year, nearly every bill I passed with bipartisan support, because we have to be addressing and working with people to tackle the challenges that they face together. And that's when we can find real solutions and get things done.
Thank you.
If I
Mr.
could,
Mayor, yeah.
And I think it's important to understand as mayor, I face those issues on a daily basis, and we've had to tackle those. You know, during the pandemic, we had to make sure that we created opportunities for people, that we provided the leadership that they needed, that executive leadership. So we provided new job opportunities. We created, equity and inclusion. We made sure that people were able to eat and distribute food. So I understand how important that is.
Okay, thank you. Delegate Lehrman, sticking with the topic of the legislature and the Comptroller's office, or the BPW, one of the things the General Assembly did a few years ago was took a lot of responsibility away from the Board of Public Works for school construction, contract awards, and oversight. Would you seek any kind of legislation to have that reversed? And I guess you were there when that was enacted. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a concern. So for education, right? I am a public school mom. I have a 3rd grader. I also have a rising pre-Ker. And so I think it's really important that we remember that when you're a kindergartner, you get one chance, right? You're in that building that you have. And so we want to make sure that every child in Maryland is attending school in a building that's worthy of them, right? A beautiful building that has great internet, that has air conditioning, that has everything that it needs to make sure that a child there understands that we, the people of Maryland, believe in them, and we want them to have all the tools they need to succeed, right? Because when a kid walks into a school where it's clearly not well taken care of and it's really old and decrepit, it doesn't say a lot to that kid about how much we as a society or we as a government value that child, right? It's terrible and it's unacceptable. Unfortunately, the process over the past decade or so has really gotten too slow and bogged down. And so what we were trying to do is ensure that we could make sure that there was proper oversight by the IAC, which is the Interagency Committee on School Construction, that oversees and works with all the different school boards around the state to oversee their projects and make sure dollars are being spent in an accountable and transparent way. They still have to go to the Board of Public Works to get the final sign off, right? It's not automatic. So the Board of Public Works still plays a key role in checking a box and making sure that the contractor's requirements are being met. We can look at MBE requirements and goals to make sure they're being met. I think it's also essential that we start building in and making sure that we're looking at sustainability, right? Are we building net zero schools or not? So the responsibility is still there, but we tried to streamline the process to make sure that we were building schools in an efficient and effective way to get them to our kids, so our kids have great, beautiful schools in which to learn.
Mayor Adams, what did you think of that decision to take some of the power away from the Board of Public Works on school construction? And is that something you would seek to reverse if you're a comptroller?
Yeah, I think that goes back to having a comptroller and being able to speak the truth. The truth of the matter was that was just a political move. That's what it was. Anyone who goes back and looks at it will say that that was a solution seeking a problem. There was no problem there. There is visibility and accountability within the comptroller's office, and I would like to see it move back. I think school construction and those things that are going on, I think back with the comptroller's office, it should be somewhere where we have greater visibility prior to it just getting to the Board of Public Works. That we should have an opportunity for all of the people to give their input and their insight. Again, some even ask, why did they do it? They try to remember even what the reason was. And we go back, and again, we have to just speak the truth about it. It was a political decision made that I don't think is in the best interest of our kids. All of our kids deserve the best that they can get in schools. All of our kids deserve that education. I'm a perfect example of that. You know, I've been able to be successful in life because of that education. And we need to do that for all of our kids. But we need to have a place where not only our students, but our educators are safe and bad. When you start getting into arguments about putting in air conditions and those kind of things, those are things that just have to happen. And I think the comptroller's office is in a position to make sure that those things go back to happening and regulated. Again, I thought that was a political move that had more to do with individual personalities than it did in trying to do what we need most, and that's to make sure we have the finest schools in the nation.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add,
yeah, please tell me.
I'd just like to add that, in fact, I don't believe in bureaucracy for bureaucracy's sake. I think it's really essential that there's increased transparency around all of the spending that we're doing. And that transparency, sorry, somebody's driving by me. That transparency happens when they're at the local level, right? So that parents and kids and community members can give input on their school decisions. But what we did was ensure that the Board of Public Works is still there, is still transparent at the end of this, and but there's less transparency, so that there's less bureaucracy, so that schools can get built more quickly.
Got it. Thank you. Okay, I think, Mr. Mayor, this one goes to you, and this is actually another question about a move the legislature made to take some power away from the comptroller's office. And this is kind of a wonky thing that probably isn't on a lot of average voters' radars, but a couple of years ago, the legislature voted to take tobacco and alcohol regulation away from the comptroller's office and basically create a new little agency within the governor's office to do those jobs. And so I guess the question is, I mean, how would you assess how that's going so far? And would you advocate for reverting that to the comptroller's control at some point? So alcohol and tobacco, Mr. Mayor.
Well, I think the first thing we need to all understand and know is that the comptroller developed a great great reputation nationwide. The personnel there in being able to handle alcohol and tobacco and the regulation of what they were doing with that. They had an outstanding record across the nation, and people looked to them and were very proud and used them as a model of how to do it. But then again, it got into one of those political things where that was moved from the comptroller's office. The interesting part is that it used a lot of the same people, but it just put the control somewhere else. And the thing, I just don't agree. I don't think that was in the best interest of the people. I think that we need to talk the truth about that. I think that new Alcohol Tobacco Commission isn't as transparent as things were within the comptroller's office. I think when you talk about moving that regulation, I've heard someone say something about, we are concerned about whether or not there was a fairness in that and if there might be corruption. I think those are horrible things to accuse the fine men and women of the comptroller's office for. They did a great job in what they were doing. And I would look to see that move back. I think that would be in the best interest. I think that would be the way for us to have greater visibility. I think the Alcohol Tobacco Commission moves back, just like if marijuana is passed, I think that should go under the comptroller's office to regulate so that we could tax it, regulate it, and make sure that we educate people. And I think, again, we've got to have a comptroller who speaks the truth and talks about what's best for our taxpayers.
Thank you. Delegate Learman.
Thank you. So several years ago, Maryland, we did a study on best practices in regulating the alcohol and tobacco industries. And what that study showed us was that every other state in the country has an independent agency to do tobacco and alcohol regulation. And so that is the model that we moved to through legislation. I'm for following the evidence. I think it's important to adopt best practices. I work regularly with the ATC, the Alcohol and Tobacco Commission. I represent an awesome area in the state, but it also has more liquor licenses than any other district in the states. And so, we make sure that the ATC is working collaboratively with our restaurants. It's working collaboratively with the comptroller's office. They have a signed MOU to make sure that the field agents can work together to carry out their respective roles. And I think it makes a lot of sense to have marijuana also be under that agency. So there is a specialized body. I've fought for years and advocated for years for legalization of recreational marijuana, and I think it opens up a huge amount of opportunity here in Maryland for small businesses, and I'm excited about that. But they're also going to need support, and they're going to need support from the comptroller's office because of the complexity of the tax code and paying taxes as an industry that's not recognized as legal under the federal government. So I believe that the ATC is continuing to do important work. I think Jeff Kelly, who's the executive director, is working very hard to make sure that they get their website up and running, that there's more transparency around the agency, that it's easier to contact, and believe that if I'm the next comptroller, I'll continue to work collaboratively with them and continue this recognized best model.
Thank you.
If I could,
please.
I think the only reason why you should move the agency or something is if it shows that it's a benefit to the citizens, to the taxpayers. I haven't seen anything that shows that there has been some kind of improvement by moving the alcohol and tobacco regulation from the comptroller's office to the ATC. I mean, that would be like saying we need to get rid of the Board of Public Works because we're the only state that has it.
Well, for me, it gives the executive director more flexibility in how the agency is carried out while also getting support of the comptroller's office. It can support and be more flexible and nimble in what his agents need on the ground to get things done. It's only been in existence now for a year, so I think it's too soon to tell. But I also think that, after the research that was done, it was a fair assessment that this was the way to go. And that's why I supported it and continue to support it.
Thank you.
I do believe that the people should have an independent voice. That voice coming from the comptroller whenever the people's money is being spent.
All right, thank you.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, so I think Delegate Lerman, you're up now. The legislature this year passed some bills to provide, to basically lift the sales tax for the sale of diapers and some other, personal hygiene products. This may be a kind of a weird question, sound like a weird question, but how does the comptroller sort of work with, with other government agencies, with advocates? How do you work to sort of get the word out about something like that?
Yep, that's a really important question because, of course, when legislation is passed, we want to make sure that the people who are going to benefit from it actually benefit from it. So first, I would say it depends on the type of tax reform that's done, right? For instance, the diaper sales tax elimination, it's automatic, right? So when you go buy your diapers, you are no longer paying sales, you will no longer be paying sales tax. One of the things that I think is important about that is to work with the diaper banks around the state. I've worked with diaper banks around the state, for instance, Share Baby in Central Maryland, to make sure that they are aware that this exists so that their vendors, whether they're buying from out of state or working with, the different diaper agencies, that they're not being charged for that sales tax anymore, that the laws are updated. And so that people know that this is the law now. They will see a deduction or they will see a decrease in what they're paying for diapers, for dental hygiene projects, for insulin. So a variety of things on sales tax. Then when you're talking about benefits like the earned income tax credit or the big tax credit that we passed to help our older Marylanders, actually the largest tax credit for older Marylanders in over 50 years, those tax credits are ones that the comptroller's office really needs to advertise and dig down deep at the grassroots level to make sure people know, whether that's working with partners like AARP or the cash campaign. The earned income tax credit, we actually have, we passed it last year. We have the largest and most generous earned income tax credit in the country right now. And I was proud to help play a leading role in that. But too many families don't know that it's owed to them. So we passed additional legislation this year to work with the comptroller's office to ensure that they're reaching out to those families, that they have that they are set up to reach out to families to make sure that they know they qualify for those. And it's the same thing that we need to do with older Marylanders to make sure that they know what is owed to them so they can take advantage of that.
Thank you. Mayor Adams, what's your vision for sort of getting the word out about these programs and changes and tax breaks for hardworking Marylanders?
I think that's a great question because a part of it goes back to that executive leadership and that experience, that 30 years of business as well as government experience, in a sense of being able to make sure, as mayor, for example, it's not just about having the laws passed, but implementing them and getting the word to the people. One of the things that we have to continue to do is understand it's about communicating. It's about taking all of the offices that we have within those 12 offices, those regional offices, within the comptroller's office, and making sure we're reaching out to people, making sure that we have that outreach, that they get that, making sure that we're making those communications to people. That's where the heart of it is. It's one of those things where, I talk about having that executive experience of how to get the word out, how to share with people, how to make sure that everybody is being included. I have people working at 23 different states, and it's about communication. It's about implementing those policies and making them happen. One of the things that we've talked about too is potentially having that free filing for those making less than $100,000 a year, where the comptroller's office can prepare the tax for people so that they can take a look at it and see, and just to make sure that they're getting all the credits that they deserve. and making sure that they have a choice to decide to accept that or file their own, but to make sure that we get the word out. And a part of that is not only just what we do electronically and all of that, but also making sure that the doors are open and that we are reaching out into the communities. And that's something that's so important, particularly for our low income and our communities of color, making sure they get what they need.
Thank you.
Yep. I'd just add, I think it's really essential that we reimagine how the 12 field offices that the Comptroller's office has around the state engage with their communities. As a leader in the House of Delegates and in my district, I have pre-established relationships with community leaders and organizations. So when the pandemic hit, I was able to make sure that we were reaching out to everybody and people knew what was available. Likewise, those 12 offices around the state need to establish important relationships in the communities. The Comptroller's office already does free tax filing. We need to make sure that people know that and it's available to them by using those offices.
Thank you. Going to ask one more question about legislation, then move to a couple of pension questions. And this is a question about a bill that comes up year after year. It hasn't passed yet, but if it ever did, the Comptroller's office would certainly have a role in sort of how it would work. This is the issue. This is a corporate tax reform issue, the issue of combined reporting. And just quickly for listeners, basically this would require corporations and their subsidiaries to kind of combine their earnings for tax purposes, which the thought is would create more revenue for the state. And I'm sorry if I'm not doing that justice, but I think Mayor Adams, we begin with you. Is that legislation you would favor?
Oh, absolutely. That's something that I push for and will continue to push for. Look, we've got to make sure that everybody pays their fair share here in the state of Maryland. You know, what we have is corporations that are wreaking profits here in the state. And in doing so, they're using our infrastructure, they're using our support systems, they're using all of those things here in the state, but they're not paying their fair share. And so people understand when we talk about combined reporting, what we're wanting those companies to do is they make the profits here in the state of Maryland, but then they report them to a state where they pay little or no taxes on it. Well, that does nothing for our infrastructure. That does nothing for our schools. Look, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for a great education. We need to make sure that we're collecting all of those tax dollars and making sure that we're doing things like fully funding our education and putting that back into our school. So yes, I am 100% behind us continuing to look and try and get combined reporting, because we need to make sure that that money comes back to the state. We need to make sure that we can do everything we can to cut that tax burden on all of our small businesses and all of our young men and women who are trying to work and our working families. You know, one of the things that I've heard is that out of 130 of our largest corporations here in the state of Maryland, a third of them pay zero in taxes. And that's just unacceptable. That puts way too much of a burden on the average citizen. It puts way too much burden on our small businesses. And more importantly, it deprives our citizens, particularly our kids and our educators, of the money we need for education itself.
Thank you. Delegate, what do you think of combined reporting?
Yes, well, I have a record on it. I have voted to support it in the House of Delegates. So I absolutely do support combined reporting. For folks who aren't familiar with it, we've seen corporate income taxes decline over the past few years. And one of the reasons for that has been tax avoidance, right, by large multi-state companies. If you're a company and you only pay corporate income taxes, if you only do business in one state, then it's simple. All your profits, they're all taxable in that one state, you pay your taxes there. But if you do business in multiple states, for instance, you have subsidiaries, it can be more difficult. And combined reporting requires those multi-state companies to add together all their profits and regardless of their location into one report. And so I think not only is that the right thing to do, but we would join the vast majority of states who already do this. And so we are missing out because other states have already stepped forward to do this, which is why I've supported it. I'll also add, though, that there are a number of businesses that are Maryland businesses that do not pay their taxes appropriately. I have represented low-wage workers for over a decade against numerous businesses, large, medium, out-of-state, in-state, who are not paying their workers, right? I represent their workers in Fair Labor Standards Act cases, Warren Act cases, and more. And whenever I see an employer not paying their workers, I see an employer that's not paying their taxes. And so I have the experience that I'm excited to bring to the Comptroller's office to make sure that we're going after those scofflaws, right? That we are ensuring that those companies are paying their fair share. They should be paying their workers, and the Department of Labor's got to help with that. And they have to be paying their taxes. And in the Comptroller's office, we will aggressively go after those companies who are not paying their taxes to make sure that they pay their fair share, just like everybody on this call does.
Thank you.
I would say that it's important that we understand, as a business owner, as someone who has a business that does in so many different states, you know, we hear excuses about why we can't do it, and there are those who pose and say that it's a cost burden on businesses and all. I do not agree with that. As Comptroller, I will be a voice from that bully pulpit, making sure we advocate this and working with people like C.T. Wilson of the Economic Matters Chair and others to make sure we see this happen.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Delegate Learman, you're up. I'm going to ask a couple of questions about pensions, and the second one I'm going to ask is about climate change. So just keep that in the back of your mind. And the first question is kind of a broad one, but basically kind of, I mean, how do you think the pension system is working in our state? Are, you know, retirees getting sufficient return on their investment? And are there aspects of the system that should be, the state retirement system, that should be changed? Delegate, and then Mr. Mayor.
In 2 minutes.
Yeah. I know.
Whoa, okay. So our pension system, I chair the Joint Pension Committee now. I've sat on our Pension Oversight Committee and our Joint Committee for 8 years. So I have a lot to say about our pension system, but suffice to say this. 8 years ago when I entered, our pension system was in real trouble. We passed legislation to require that we meet the actuarial amount every year of funding so that we could actually fully fund our pension system. Fast forward 8 years later, we are nearly to 80% funded in our pension system, which is the standard that we want to be at, and that the bond rating agencies are looking for us to be at. So we have come a long way. 2, we can always do better, right? We are paying too many fees to outside investment management companies. And so several years ago, we worked through the Joint Committee on Pensions to say, look, we got to reduce the fees. Like, our pensioners deserve this money to go in to the pension system and then to them. So we started the process of bringing some of our investment decisions in-house. It's been a long process. It's very complicated in terms of how we pay investment managers in the pension system and whatnot, but we're doing it, we're getting there. We have to do more. I won't talk about climate yet because that's the next question, but we also have to make sure that we're keeping guard and that we're diversifying the investment managers that we use. Many years ago, we set up a program called the Terra Maria program that invests dollars in small, Black-owned, women-owned, business investment teams. And we've seen over the years that the Terra Maria firms often outperform our standard firms that we use, which I think just goes to show that we need to do a much better job at diversifying the investment management firms that we use overall. So those are a few of the things that I'd like to see us doing a better job at, and I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I think we can do a better job on the management of our pension system. One of the things to understand, for example, I'm an emeritus member of the Maryland Foundation system, pension system. So I've been doing this for a while as well. I understand about managing and having that fiduciary responsibility. One of the things I was listening as we were talking about the Terra Maria program, the issue with that is, just for people real quick, the committee that really does the investment is set up by the governor and the collective bargaining user, but they use outside advisors. The issue is what I would say immediately as comptroller is I would make sure to present to them qualified advisors, outside advisors who look and represent the people of Maryland, particularly people of color and women, and have those qualified people put there, because those are the people who can influence who we utilize to actually do the investments with our chief investment officer. I think it's important that we put it to him to make sure that when he's doing his workflow plan, that he's making sure that those businesses, the Tierra Maria, that the minority programs are all included in that. We need to make sure that that's a part of how he is judged on his performance. I think we also need to make sure that we don't get caught up in indexing, and that's a process where you just invest in one thing. We want to make sure we have a good balance, because we want to make sure that we have independent people that can hold us not only when the market is up, but also when it's going down, and make sure that we have the best we can do and get that double bottom line investment where we invest in our people and we get money invested, but that we also make sure that we're doing environmentally sound investments as well.
Thank you. You anticipated my next question, Mr. Mayor, which is, and you go first this round. Should Maryland's pension funds divest from fossil fuel interests? And if so, how do you get there, and how quickly can we get there?
I think we can. One of the things that we have to do is we have to make sure that we're doing more investment in renewable energy. We have to make sure that we're doing investments in solar, that we're doing in the wind. There are so many opportunities we have to get away from that. We depend too much on the fossil fuel. We see what happens with that. Right now, we're going through a process now where based on and depending on fossil fuel, we see what's happening to the average working class American. We see the pain that they're going through every time they go to the gas pump. And that's an issue because we're so dependent on fossil fuels. I believe we can get to zero emissions. I think we just have to do, just like we're doing in the city of Bowie. We've invested there. We have a fleet now of battery powered cars, of electric vehicles. We've put up electric charging stations, not only at City Hall, but out in the city as well. We're making sure that we're making those investments. We're looking to do all of our buildings and make them LEED. We've set up now we're working on our second solar farm, where not only are we going to be covering all of the energy for the city, but we'll be able to have additional energy that we'll be able to give or sell back to the citizens as well. And that goes back to being the manager and an executive of a city, and making sure that all of those things happen. But we can get there, and we've got to work there, and we have no choice. If we want our children to have clean air to breathe and water to drink, then we've got to make this happen.
Delegate?
Thank you for that question. In a word, yes. It's important that we move quickly towards divestment for the sake of our pension fund. We have seen numerous studies over the years demonstrate that investing in fossil fuels has led to lower returns than if we would have invested elsewhere. And I was really proud that to lead the effort this year to make sure that we're moving away from fossil fuels and coal. So this year, we were the first state in the country to legislate that climate risk is investment risk, and to direct our pension plan to not only begin to do a review of the total investment portfolio of all of the systems to determine the level of climate risk across industry sectors and asset classes, but also to identify investment opportunities in emerging technologies and renewable energy and transitioning, reducing, and eliminating carbon emitting technology, right? So and to then regularly reassess the systemic risks of the impact of climate change on the assets of the system. So, and then based on that information, instructed the CIO, subject to the, of course, to oversight by the Board of Trustees, to manage the investments in accordance with what is found. And so that, I believe, will lead us towards divestment in a purposeful way and investment in new technologies that will put us in a position of being an incredibly good fiscal steward and fiduciary of the dollars for our pensioners, for our state retirees, while also ensuring that we are living out our values as a state. And we have identified, we are working on climate change as a state in a bipartisan way, and with the former Secretary of the Environment, and there's more that we need to do. So I'm excited for the Board of Trustees to work on this bill. This bill is now being shopped around the country, in fact, as a model, and I'm proud that we're leading the effort.
I think it's important to add right here as well, understand the environmental impacts are an economic issue for us. As we move forward and as we have the climate change and those issues, those will impact our economy here in the state. And so it's not just something as just for an environmental purpose, but people need to understand that this climate change can ruin and have a devastating effect on our economy as well. I think you're on mute.
You're on mute, Josh.
Sorry about that. So I think this will probably be our last question, and then we'll have closing remarks. But let's stick with climate change, and I'm sorry I'm going to do this as kind of a two-parter, and Mayor Adams, you're up first. The Board of Public Works in the past year or thereabouts voted on a controversial natural gas pipeline project on the Eastern Shore, running it through the Eastern Shore. And I guess, quickly, would you have voted for that if you had been comptroller? And just kind of, can you just speak a little bit too about what the state government's priorities ought to be when it comes to combating climate change?
I again, speaking the truth, I would not have supported that. I mean, it's a decision that's been made. It's one that is in process. But I think the environmental impacts, I don't know that we've truly done the studies that we needed to make sure that that did not hurt us from an environmental standpoint. I go back to what I was mentioning earlier, as opposed to running that gas pipeline. And again, it's a done deal. It's done. But I think we should have been focusing more on our wind energy, not only in the water, but on land, and investing and making sure that that's where we put our emphasis. We need to go back to understanding, as I said a little earlier, climate change and the impacts on our environment aren't just something that is just good for us, but it's to help our future generations, but it also helps us from an economy standpoint, from an economic standpoint. See, one of the things is, for those who may not know, I'm a commissioner. I'm on the Critical Area Commission for the Chesapeake and the Bay Areas. And so I understand, and we work constantly in trying to preserve and save our wetlands and making sure we preserve our coasts, because we understand how important that is. I'm on the board of the National Aquarium, where we're trying to teach people and get them to understand about the ecosystem that's so dependent. But yeah, I think I would not do that. And I think anything we do, we need to make sure we have the environmental impacts done first, and particularly in areas that affect our rural and our people of color.
Thank you. Delegate, about the pipeline and then climate generally.
Thank you. I think that the pipeline was incredibly problematic and short-sighted, and I signed a letter encouraging not to support, but I also think it needed to start before then, right? The Board of Public Works and the University System of Maryland needs to work with UMES and other organizations. UMES is a historically Black college, an essential school in the USM system, and we needed to work with them from the beginning to ensure that they had access to more sustainable energy sources. And so, that's what we need to start at the beginning to make sure that we're getting there from the ground floor. On climate generally, it's absolutely essential. The comptroller needs to be a fiscal steward, to be the people's advocate, has to put the climate first. I've been an environmental leader in the House of Delegates, both on the Appropriations Committee and the Environment and Transportation Committee. I'm excited to be a climate comptroller, right? First, we have to make sure that the office is ensuring the climate resilience of taxpayer dollars, right? We need to take a lead role in analyzing the implications for the state's budget and identifying areas of greatest risk. This is something the bond rating agencies care about. We need to do an audit of all our public buildings to understand the cost to ensure their climate resiliency. We need to be doing more environmentally sustainable procurement, right? Evaluating our procurement practices, because the Board of Public Works is not just the decision maker. The Board of Public Works also writes the regulations for procurement. And so we need to make sure that those procurement practices allow the ability to upgrade, more energy efficient buildings, that all the federal money that we're getting in, that we use it in an environmentally sustainable way. We also need to hold polluters accountable, and we need to support offshore wind development and our solar farms. So there's much that the Comptroller's office can do. I look forward to being a partner and a leader in ensuring the climate resiliency of all of our dollars and in building a strong climate, a strong sustainable economy.
Thank you. Well, incredibly, we've reached the just about the end. And so we invite each of you to make 3-minute closing statements. And I guess since we're rotating here, Delegate Learman, we'll start with you.
Okay, well, thank you to everybody. 150 people still on 90 minutes later. Thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you so much for your civic participation. I truly appreciate it. I have loved being on this campaign journey. I have run truly a 24 county campaign from Oakland, Maryland to St. Mary's to Pocomoke City to Cecil County and everywhere in between, from Upper Marlboro to Waldorf to Baltimore County, Baltimore City, Howard County. I've loved it because in order to know a state, in order to work with and govern a state, you need to know the state. So I'm just thrilled to be here with all of you and looking forward to the next 49 days on the campaign trail. I want to say that we have the opportunity now, and this is something I strongly believe, in the words of Senator Paul Wellstone, that we have the opportunity and obligation to know that we all do better when we all do better. And we have to use this opportunity to make sure, that we are electing people who have a vision for government service that puts families and communities at the center of every decision and who has the ability to get things done. I am excited as the next comptroller to focus on 3 things. 1, to be present and proactive, right? To make sure that we are tackling barriers in all of our 12 field offices around the state, that we're creating opportunity, that we're digging in at the grassroots level. 2, making sure that we use the power of the purse to help build generational wealth and to help build for generations, right? Let's tackle economic inequality and make Maryland the state that created an economy that works for everyone with these huge infrastructure dollars that we are getting, right? Making sure we're putting best value, not lowest cost, at the center of every decision, not waiving MBE requirements, building climate resilient buildings. That's what we can do in the next 4 years to build a better state over the next 40. And then finally, making government work better for you. That's what I've been doing as the leader in the House of as a leader in the House of Delegates, as a leader in my communities, and for my life. And I want to make sure that, we're making it easier to pay taxes, that we're lowering costs of compliance for small businesses, making sure everyone pays their fair share, that we're bringing more transparency and accountability to government as well. These are just a few of the ways that I know that this office can make Maryland the state that we all know it should be. We are at a truly critical juncture here in the state. We have some of the most prosperous communities, but far too many who continue to suffer from poverty, racial discrimination, and more. This is our time to get it right. As the elected chief financial officer for the state of Maryland, our comptroller has to be a leader who embraces creative ideas and can put those ideas into action. I'm so proud to have the support of so many of my colleagues in the House of Delegates, Congressman Jamie Raskin, Congressman Steny Hoyer, 75 mayors and municipal leaders, but I hope I can earn your support. And over the next 49 days, I'll hope you join our effort to build a better Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate Mayor Adams.
Hey, again, thank you for hosting this forum this evening, and thank you for everybody who tuned in. I just want to say, I've lived my life overcoming barriers, starting with the poverty in which I grew up in. I didn't have a start that was comparable to some others, but I learned through hard work and education and values that you can accomplish anything. I was able to start a business out of the trunk of my car, which is now one of the largest Black-owned businesses in the nation, and provide opportunities for all Americans to do this. I fought that fight to make sure that there's equity and inclusion for all of us. I have that executive experience in 30 years in both business and in government. Every day I face those challenges of implementing those things and fighting those barriers as a mayor of a city and dealing with all the challenges that go there, balancing budgets, making sure we keep our AAA ratings, making sure that we're taking care of people and implementing those laws and those things that we need to have done. But more importantly, I think I'm the embodiment of that true American dream. I've come from that poverty, and I've been able to rise up and to be able to create opportunity for others all across this country. And that's what this is about. As comptroller, I'll bring that executive leadership and ability to help all Marylanders and make sure that I keep an eye on where those dollars are being spent. I often talk about Shirley Chisholm because I'm not part of the political insiders. I'm not from a political lineage or a lot of money, but I am from a world of hard workers. And like Shirley Chisholm said, I'm unbossed and I'm unbought. I just want to be that person who speaks directly to the people and who has their best interests and only wants to make sure that they are the ones. I suffered an accident and ended up a paraplegic. But I may be disabled, but I think I constantly show my ability. 30 years of executive experience and an ability to help others. I want to make sure that all Marylanders have a fair chance and a fair opportunity, and that they can experience the American dream the same way I have. And that's what I want.
Thank you, Mayor Adams. I often say this when I moderate a forum. You may love a candidate, you may hate a candidate, you may be deciding, but it takes an awful lot to put yourself out there. And so I just salute both Mayor Adams and Delegate Learman for doing this and for being with us tonight. Thanks to all our great sponsors, particularly the League of Women Voters of Maryland. And thanks to everyone for listening. So peace out. Good night. Thanks for being with us.
Thank
Don't
you,
forget
everyone.
to vote.